It's so common for me to meet people like you who have been learning French on and off for decades, perhaps since high school. Now that you're retired or approaching retirement age, you want to have one serious last crack at the French language, but it's so disheartening to see how limited you are in your ability to have normal conversations despite all of those years of learning the language. I recently ran a free 3-day challenge and I was receiving messages like, and I'm going to read them here so I don't get them wrong, I'm not part of the conversation because I can't keep up. I'm there at the table, but I'm not there at the same time. And when I do get an opportunity to practice, they reply to me in English. So in this video, I'm simply going to tell you how to reset. You're going to get out of your negative headspace that has formed gradually over the years of not making the progress that you want to make and kick on to confident, comfortable conversations over the age of 50. Du coup, si vous êtes prêts, allez, c'est parti. When you've gone a few years in French without seeing the progress you truly want, we need to be able to wipe the slate clean, or faire table rase as they say in French, and reset our expectations, reset our approach, and not be burdened by those feelings of, oh, I haven't improved since X time, I haven't really kicked on since then. You really need to sort of wipe the slate clean, start from zero or as close to zero so that you can make progress with that, our most precious resource, which is our time. Staying hung up on the past only diverts your attention from what you could truly be doing now in the present to make sure the future version of you is the confident, comfortable French speaker that you want to become. So here are 3 things you absolutely must be doing in order to enfin start speaking better French. So in order to start this reset in your relationship with the French language, it's important to understand exactly what got you here. So I'm just going to hop over and share my screen and we'll get started. So some days you're loving French, right? You're in the flow, you're understanding enough, you're having conversations, you're just enjoying the language and everything around it. Just like this little character here, you're thinking, je kiffe, which is an informal way of saying j'adore, right? You're just feeling good. And we don't focus too much on those because we just feel good, right? We don't question it. And some days, French is a pain in the hole. You have feelings of overwhelm, exhaustion, boredom, feeling like you're in over your head, like you'll never be able to do this, like you're directionless. And this leads you to feeling like you're rubbish, or je suis nul, as the little guy in the picture here. And as a one-off, this is fine, doesn't really affect us, but generally these things go in cycles. And in your case, these have been cycles which have been going on for years, if not decades. And this is completely normal for any French learner. However, compounded over time, this can be a major source of frustration, which just leads to a loss of confidence and has led you here to where you have more of a negative relationship with the French language than a positive one. It is normal. It's definitely not your fault. You're in a rut right now, but it is your responsibility and you can get out of the rut, I assure you. So many people, not you though, so many people give up because of this, because who wants to just keep going through cycles of not enjoying stuff, right? But when these phases of frustration and confusion add up over time, they become more frequent than the joys. But no matter what, you must not give up because there is a way out, I assure you. The first thing you need is a North Star to guide you. A rock solid North Star. Why? Because this will be your never-ending source of motivation. We are talking specifically about on those days where you're not motivated, where you're directionless, where you don't feel good enough, where you just want to do something else. Right? We're not talking about the good days. We need something that even on those days where we're not feeling good about our French, we continue to do the work anyway, because you know you could feel different the next day and you want to know that in 6 months time you put in the work now to make the necessary improvements. So how do you do that? Well, you do it with a rock solid North Star. Think about it. Sports stars have many days of doubts, missing the target, and many days of doubt and frustration. But in their minds, all the way through, their goal is clear. They want to win trophies, be remembered, and live from their passion. Another example is professional musicians. They work on minute details over and over and over again. They hit the wrong notes time and again, but they keep going because they dream of playing sold out shows or simply to be the best their art form they can be. So they put up with those negatives because they have this clear picture in their head of where they want to get to, probably imagining the exact number of people in these rooms and the looks on their faces. So you know that you have to create a rock solid North Star. We call this a why, or un pourquoi. And before you do this, it's important to know from my experience what it is that can doom a why to be useless and send you back into this vicious cycle which only reinforces that negative relationship with French. So if you want to make a really, really rock solid why to get out and stay out of this plateau that you find yourself at, then you need to make sure it is not too vague, that it's not too broad, and that it's extremely personal. Because when it's vague, it's not specific enough. When it's broad, it's not specific enough. And when it's too generic, you don't have an emotional attachment to it. It's not going to be what you need on those days where you'd rather just sit by the TV or scrolling on your phone rather than doing that French task that you know you should be doing. So in French, there can seem to be 100 challenges at once, which is exhausting. But on a good day, we're just flowing, we don't mind, we're just happy ticking things off the list, and we just feel good. But we're talking in this section about when things are not going well, right? Those challenges can be exhausting and overwhelming. You definitely can't fight them all at once, you're only human. You can probably work on 2-3 things at once tops, if not only one thing at a time. So when your why is too broad or too vague or not personal enough, you get overwhelmed by this high number of challenges and frustrated, and inevitably you fall back into the cycle and have yet another multi-year pause, which we don't want for you. So when you set a good one, a super specific, personal one, you never lose sight of your finish line and you make sure you get the French done that you know you need to be doing, even when you don't feel like it. So once again, once we identify something super specific that we want to achieve, that we want French to bring us, that we want our lives to become thanks to a better level of French, we can start to take it one challenge at a time. We can restore hope, and when we restore hope, we feel great along the way because we know that what we're doing is working, and that engenders more inspiration, motivation, which leads to more positive action and more results. Okay? So how do you define a rock solid why? Well, these 5 questions are a fantastic aid. Number 1, where do you want to use your French? i.e. in what situations? Maybe in a specific location, right? Remember, specific's the key word here. Number 2, who do you want to use your French with in the future, in the long term, when you feel like you've got it, you've cracked it, you've succeeded? Who will you be speaking with most often? Number 3, how do you want to feel when you're having those conversations in yourself? How do you feel? What are the emotions you feel? What are the sensations you feel? Numéro 4 is, what do you want to be talking about? What are the topics that you would like to just flow without thinking about your words, without worrying about mistakes? What topics are you most often talking about? And number 5 is, what uncomfortable or painful situations that you've lived right now or that you're afraid of living because of your limited ability, what do you want to avoid or not see a repeat of? It's incredibly normal for us as human beings to not want to revisit painful or uncomfortable situations or acknowledge our limitations. But actually, when we are brave enough to do that, when we write them down, it actually diffuses them, it takes their power away, and it gives us a powerful target which starts to form a really powerful why, a rock solid pourquoi. Some examples are feeling guilt from relying on a French partner too much, or a partner that speaks French, and maybe you've moved to France or Quebec or wherever, and they're doing all the talking. You have guilt over that. Maybe you freak out and freeze when you don't understand your neighbor. Maybe it's lack of independence as an adult. You're a fully grown person and you just can't act for yourself in a lot of ways because of your limited ability with French. Maybe there's shame that you carry from not speaking to French speakers that you have in your life, right? And it's been years, you see them and the relationship still exists in English. So defining a powerful why can involve taking those painful situations, those unpleasant emotions that you carry, and turning them into solutions or to goals, or in this example, our why, our long-term ultimate goal for French. So for example, I want to no longer freak out when a neighbour speaks to me in our building. I don't want to be scared to direct a taxi driver when I arrive in France on holiday. I'll soon be able to feel confidence in my conjugation skills when speaking. I will soon make friends with parents at my kids' school and have them see me as a French speaker. You know, so these are big targets. The third one is more of like a medium-term one, but these are big targets. These are exciting things that you'll be able to achieve, and you've developed this from a painful emotion and experience rather than hiding from it, which is empowering in itself. So those are just a sample of some short, concise examples, but you shouldn't be afraid to get deep on this, write detail on this. The most important things are that your why should be super, super specific. This can be specific in terms of naming places, people, names, faces, link them to memories, real people. If you could put names on them, if you can describe what they look like, where they are, what clothes they wear, who are they in their personalities, what do they like to talk about, what do you like to talk about with them. How specific you get, the more specific you get, the more powerful this why is. I can't emphasize that enough. And draw on personal good and bad experiences, dreams. The more imagery you can use and build this into something that you write down is extremely, extremely powerful. Here are just another sample of a bit more fleshed out whys. These are from my previous students and I've changed their names to protect their identities. But the middle one here is my favorite on this page. Morgan, along with her French husband, Fred, and 2 children, they had moved to France from South Africa, and she desperately wanted to be more independent and rely less on Fred to deal with everything that had to be done in French because, well, she wants to be an independent adult human being, but she wrote down that, you know, their relationship was struggling. She got really honest with herself. Okay, she shared this with me because we were working together, but this is just for you, so don't be afraid to write something personal down. It's just for you. Because when you write this down, get it out of your head and write it down, it takes on a whole new dimension. And remember, we're just trying to get more French done in those days where we don't feel like it. This is a huge driving factor. Okay? And Craig, living in London, he was sick of freaking out when he would travel to France and just a stranger would speak to him, and even though he knew enough French, he just freaked out and his mind went blank. So he wanted that to go away, and that's what he strived for every single day when he got serious again about French with this new approach. Okay, so numéro 1 is have a rock solid why, which will help you build up your consistency by making sure you do the work that you said to yourself needs to be done in order to achieve that long-term ultimate goal. And having something like learning French for fluency or learning French for life in France is not enough. That is not going to get you out of quicksand on a day where you'd rather just sit on the couch and do nothing. So that is the very first step to resetting and setting solid foundations so that you can see progress every time you open your mouth or sit down to study, okay? It's all about knowing why you're doing this, why you're putting yourself through this sometimes discomfort. By the way, guys, just quickly, if you're enjoying what we're talking about here, then until August 21st, 2024, in case you're watching this before that deadline, there are enrollments happening for the Confident French Speaker community, from which I've directly taken these lessons from this video, and there are far more in there. So if you're watching this before August 21st, click the link up here somewhere to go and check it out and enroll, or down in the description at the end of the video. Okay, back to the video. The second stage is to simply start being more positive about your French and who you are and what kind of French learner you are, how good you are. And just, you know, to bring a bit of humor into it, I say, stop being a negative Nancy. It's absolutely not your fault that you tend to focus more on the negatives than the positives, the things that you can't do or that you suck at in French, rather than the things that you've already achieved. I mean, think about how far you've come, right? You've done a lot, you've learned a lot. compared with a monolingual person, and the amount you can understand from reading and listening and the grammar already, it's significant. As humans, it actually comes more naturally to all of us to focus on problems, challenges, mistakes, etc., than on our successes, our victories, and our accomplishments. So to explain this, I'm going to take you back in time, way, way back, when we were fighting for our lives on a near daily basis, right? We have this fight or flight mechanism in our brains, in all of our brains. And the threats back then were literal threats to our lives. And if we showed weakness, we risked being thrown out of our tribe because we weren't useful, okay? It was a survival instinct. We either fight if we can, or we flee if we realize the fight is lost. The thing is, this mechanism remains in our brains today. The threats are, thankfully, for most of us, not existential or risks to our lives on a daily basis. However, our brain still sees threats. It's threats to our ego. It's threats to who we see ourselves as a person, right? Because we don't want to be ostracized. We don't want to be thrown out of our tribe. But what form do these threats come in these days when we're learning French? Well, they come in the form of scary situations where we risk embarrassing ourselves, situations where we risk not understanding, things like going on the phone. Oh my God, that is so scary, so intense, because we don't know what to do if we don't understand the person speaking to us on the other end of the phone. So this, when we're learning a language, when we're being vulnerable, where we're going back to basics in terms of communicating as a human, it represents a lot of threats to our fragile egos. So it's completely normal that you start to avoid these, that you don't want to do it, that there's a lot of resistance. It's totally normal. But we can change it, and you absolutely have to start changing it if you're going to be able to consistently put yourself out there in order to see results. So as we said, under stress, you just can't think clearly. You've just got fight or flight. You've got survival in your head, surviving that situation with your ego and your dignity intact. So under stress, you can't think clearly. It's a chemical thing in your brain, right? You've got a lot of cortisol, the stress hormone flowing around your body. So what you do is very instinctive, okay? And so at this point in your journey, that's more often than not to be self-critical, to see almost exclusively your flaws, because they are your weaknesses, right? Those have been brutally exposed. You don't, after a difficult moment, immediately just start seeing what you did well, right? No, you have to train yourself to do that. Because thankfully, we can rewire our brains. We're incredible creatures. We might just passively think about the negatives, the things we can't do, the mistakes we make, but we can actively train ourselves to see our strengths and achievements as well, and therefore see them both equally. But even better, see our failures as just things to improve. How do we do this? We do this through reframing, or le recadrage in French. It's a literal translation. They would say the same thing. In other words, this is choosing to see the same situation in a more constructive way. So just because you see something as a reason to doubt yourself or a reason to criticize yourself, you could also see it from a different angle. Here are a couple examples not from the domain of language learning. Il pleut des cordes. Merde, je ne peux pas travailler dans le jardin. It's raining a lot. Damn, I can't go and work in the garden. You could reframe this to see, bon, c'est une bonne occasion de faire la lecture. Right, well, it's actually a good opportunity to go and read. Same situation, just seen differently. One leads you to feel crappy and wallow in the negative situation, and one allows you to actually feel good about yourself and feel good about what you're doing. Another one is a musician. Juste avant une tournée, je me suis blessé la main en pratiquant, donc je ne peux plus jouer. Just before a tour, I hurt my hand while practicing and I can no longer play. Reframe it. Well, I hurt myself because I'm working too much at the moment. This actually gives me the chance to rest and come back stronger. Same situation, reframed. So one key to reframing is, instead of saying, I can't, we should ask ourselves, how can I? Think about it. My French is not as good as their English. This might be an unconscious or a conscious thought that runs through your mind. This is another way of saying, I can't speak as well as them. So you should ask yourself, how can I get closer? I will keep going in French as long as we're both happy to. Because you're not going to get better at French without keeping going, right? That's how they got good at their English. Yeah, so you know that you only get to your level by trying every single chance you get. Seconds, add up to minutes, add up to hours. So even if that's slow, the alternative is wallowing in sort of self-pity or feeling like you're not good enough, and that absolutely doesn't serve you in any way. Another one is, they speak English, I don't want to be rude. This could also be seen as, I can't bear to let them suffer my French, or I don't believe my French is worth hearing. You could reframe this, you could think of this as, how can I make sure I'm not rude? Well, you can ask them if they mind speaking French, or a mix of both. Then they actually tell you how they feel. You could also ask yourself, how can I check how my French sounds? Well, I can ask a few French speakers how my French sounds. It sounds so simple, right? But I bet you didn't think about it or allow yourself to think about it until I said it to you right now. So what this does is it gives you peace of mind by asking and doesn't let your assumption become the accepted reality. And then it frees you up to take that step and speak more French, even though you're not so confident yet. What about, I can't understand anything they say? This is going to be very common for a lot of you watching. Will you ask, how can I start to understand what they say? I can commit to a daily minimum of listening because I'm currently not doing enough. Because consistency always trumps short bursts of effort, short intense periods, right? You need to have that discipline to do French even when you don't feel like it. And if that's hard for you, then just say, okay, I'm going to do it 10 minutes a day. Skipping days here and there is obviously fine, we're all human, but we just want the overall trend of our efforts to be going up, to make sure that French is happening more often than not. What about reframing embarrassing mistakes? For example, j'ai dit dégueulasse au lieu de dégustation. On s'est moqué de moi, je ne veux plus faire la même erreur. I said disgusting instead of a tasting, like a wine tasting. People made fun of me. I don't ever want to make that same mistake again. But how could you see this positively and therefore be motivated to keep putting yourself out there? Because you need to just keep putting yourself out there. Well, you can accept that you can't always anticipate these awkward moments. You should laugh at yourself. You should just see it as a learning opportunity that you'll never forget. And you can imagine if someone else was learning English, so the shoe was on the other foot, what if they said something like that to you? You wouldn't mock them. Some examples of situations and thoughts and feelings that have been reframed from negative to positive by my students are, I can speak more often and be open to making mistakes because one mistake made means one less mistake to make. I could stop worrying so much about verb tenses because I know I would understand someone making similar mistakes in English. Absolutely. I will see all my conversation errors as a pathway to becoming a better French speaker. Yes, yes, yes. What you're trying to do is you're trying to generate positive emotions in yourself, giving yourself pats on the back because that inspires you to keep going. You're not denying the existence of the problems, but you're just seeing them in a healthier way. So yeah, this is the second step to the reset so that you can get back on the path to believing in yourself and believing that you can become the French speaker that you want to become. It is by reframing your negative thoughts around French, seeing them from a more positive light. Once you bring the positives about your French, the things you can do, the things that you've achieved to the fore more, you're going to be able to appreciate yourself and enjoy the process. And when you enjoy the process, you're motivated to keep going. You'll keep having the difficult days, but you want to keep it more of a level playing field in your mind and actually feel good about yourself, right? And that's how you do it, with reframing. So you've set up a rock solid pourquoi, you've started reframing the current negative thoughts that you have become aware of around your French and your relationship with the language, starting to turn it into more of a positive relationship. The third key skill is all about your speaking and being able to take regular action and feel good about yourself, because when you feel good about yourself, you want to take more actions. It's all about your approach to speaking. let me explain something first of all. Speaking is hard, we all agree on that, right? But actually, it's not complicated. So maybe you're like me from a few years ago who thought that complicated and hard are just synonyms. No, speaking is hard. It's hard to stick to. It's hard to keep going because there are so many factors which go into enabling you to be able to speak day after day after day, rather than give in to temptations to not speak. However, it's not complicated. You simply need to speak regularly, speak a lot, and you'll figure it out and you will make progress. Successful speaking is about daring to be intentional, knowing how to measure your progress, and allowing yourself to recognize even the smallest steps forward. Without that, you're just going to give up. You're going to head back into the cycle that you were in before, and you're going to see the same results. You need to course correct. So if you're watching this, you're still engaged with me right now, you want to see this positive change, then I'd like to use this analogy of a train. Most of you are on a train called l'apprentissage du français. In fact, me as well. Most of you are passengers. You currently let conversations come to you, or they happen based on the current status quo of your relationships with French speakers. What this means is, if those opportunities stop, you stop practicing. Not good. Fine when they're regular and they're happening, all good, right? But it's really important that you are the train driver, or even better, the train company. What does this mean in practical terms? It means that you need to be making sure that you are speaking regularly and frequently, no matter what. Even more practically, you need to be willing to go out of your way to speak, so that you're not just waiting for opportunities to come to you. You need to develop this habit of being a go-getter for your French, because no one's going to do it for you. And if those opportunities stop, you stop practicing, your progress stops, and you're in danger of then feeling not good enough because you're no longer seeing progress each day. So it's really important to be willing to go out of your way to find opportunities to speak, but also to have realistic expectations for each interaction. This is really, really key, because we don't often think we have any expectations, but actually unconsciously we're going into every conversation with an expectation. So you need to make sure you're being really, really realistic and optimistic as well, rather than already defeatist when you're going into it, right? Because if you think about something in a defeatist way, you go into that conversation, you're probably gonna make that reality come true. But the same can be true for thinking positively as well. So the chances are you've never actually thought about things like this. You've just sort of left it to chance, you've gone to a conversation, and you've come out of it feeling how you felt, right? And to a certain degree, this is inevitable, you can't change it. But if you start being more intentional, you can actually control the extent to which you feel those negative and indeed positive feelings. And I want to ask you at this point in the video, have you actually ever considered calling yourself a French speaker? Have you dared to? Because you are a French speaker. I'm telling you that right now. So let's talk a bit about expectations. Let's understand this. So naturally, we tend to want to speak French as well as we speak English. Why wouldn't we? We're simply in a rush to get there because no one told us how long it would take. No one told us the things that would come up that would stop us in our tracks, etc. So we tend to be in more and more of a rush the longer this goes on. And if you've been at this for decades, it can seem like you really want to make it happen. So every time you start again, you have these expectations and they're often never met. So of course you want to stop. And unconsciously, we take these expectations into our interactions in French. So when we inevitably fail to meet these expectations, we feel disappointed, annoyed, discouraged, frustrated, and any number of other negative emotions, which we then take into the next one and the next one and the next one. But let's be smart, right? Let's be smart, let's be pragmatic, let's be fair to ourselves. It might not be natural just yet, but you do need to accept that you're a learner and that you're going to struggle. It doesn't matter if you've been learning for 6 months or 20 or 50 years, right? You're struggling right now, you're going to struggle because this is a second language. Approach every interaction you have with this in mind. It's absolutely fair to do so. And try and shake off the relationship you have with the number of years it's been in your life and where you are now. That's not serving you anymore. The fact is, little actions performed regularly over and over add up to big results. All the people you look up to, the people you see speaking great French, that's all it is. That's why I say it's not complicated. They take little actions, they perform them regularly over and over, and it's just dealing with that emotional side of things which sees you have more success than not. And setting a simple I've underlined that, simple expectation or a goal for your interactions is the first way to measure your progress. And being very deliberate, very intentional about this at the beginning when you're learning this skill, turning it into a habit, turning it into a part of how you think by default is really, really key. Being very intentional, writing it down. So what is a SMART expectation? Well, in simple terms, it is trying to be a bit better than last time. And in every situation, every scenario, every context, that's going to mean something slightly different. So you have to have a different goal for each one. I like to say that your last performance in the same or similar context, i.e. the people, the place, the difficulty, what you're doing, how long you're speaking for, etc., those things are your baseline for your next interaction in similar circumstances. So here are some examples. If you normally switch back to English when they reply in English, you can continue in French next time. You're going a bit better than you did normally. When they speak quickly, you can ask them to slow down instead of pretending just so you don't look stupid. You're saving face in the moment, but the feeling keeps coming back. You want to make that change, and it's just a slight change from last time, but it's significant. You have around 16 waking hours in a day. You choose how much is in or around French. You can book a time with a conversation tutor or a French friend, and you can decide that 10 minutes staying in French is the criterion for success. It doesn't have to be an hour, it doesn't have to be 3 hours. It can be 10 minutes, but 10 minutes a day. That is for you. You're just trying to improve on your normal baseline, which at the moment is maybe sporadic conversations or no conversation at all. If in the French boulangerie you just order une baguette s'il vous plaît, and that's become a routine, you can ask something like "Et vous passez une bonne journée?" at the checkout, at the register, and give yourself credit for daring to start that conversation. Sure, the resulting conversation might not go your way, but just focusing on how can you go beyond ordering in the normal way? How can you shake things up? You need to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. This has to be a normal thing if you're going to be successful in the language. So those are some examples of how you can be intentional with your French and the mindset that you need to have going into your conversations. I want you to be very, very deliberate with this until this becomes just a natural part of who you are. So that means writing things down. Don't be afraid to do that extra work before you go into interactions, setting yourself up for success by defining what it means for you to come out of it feeling good about your French, because you will have reasons to doubt, you will have reasons to criticize. You'll be like, oh, want to do that better, but think about it in terms of I need to improve at that, I will improve that, rather than, oh, I suck because of that, or I should be able to do that. No, the reality is this, they're just things to use as new targets in the future. So guys, I want you to comment down below your pourquoi that you've come up with after a bit of thought, and something you have successfully reframed that you're happy with, and tell me exactly how you're going to get intentional with your spoken French, starting from today, and I will read every single comment. Thanks for sticking with me through this longer video than normal, and don't forget that the link is in the description for my program that is available until August 21st, 2024. So if you're watching before then, don't hesitate, click on the link and we can go further together and really transform your confidence.